Tonight, history will be made at Wrigley Field, home of the Chicago Cubs. Stay tuned as Chicago's very own WGN TV presents Lights On.
Lights On is brought to you in part by Nissan Cars and Trucks, built for the most important race of all, the human race. And by your Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana Chrysler Plymouth dealers.
Chicagoland Nissan dealers are saluting night baseball at Wrigley Field. Come take a test drive at any participating dealer and get a commemorative T-shirt and an official Major League Baseball. But hurry, or you'll be left in the dark.
It's a concept embraced by many, repugnant to others, but weather permitting, there will be baseball at Wrigley Field tonight. More than 37,000 fans will squeeze into the 74-year-old ballpark to witness and take part in a piece of history. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Roan, welcoming you to Wrigley Field for tonight's baseball game. The weather report so far, very good. It's hot down on the field, but no rain in sight, and hopefully we won't have any rain here until about midnight. Well, we at WGN are very happy to be able to bring you this historic moment, as we've brought you so many moments from Wrigley Field over the past 40 years. The man who'll be turning the light switch on tonight here in the ballpark is the man who's seen a lot of history pass before his eyes. 91-year-old Harry Grossman. We thought you'd like to meet him.
61 years of marriage. She still talks to me.
Florence Grossman talks to her husband all right, but only when he's not at the ballpark. These ticket stubs represent some of the 5,000 games Harry Grossman has seen over 83 years as a Cub fan. From Tinker to Evers to Chance to Hartnett, Banks, and Sandberg, he's been there. But tonight is Harry's big night.
Naturally, any person out of maybe 50,000 Cub fans, die-hard Cub fans, they would pick me out to turn on the lights. It makes me very proud and privileged person to do so. So I feel pretty good. Anybody would. If I say no, I wouldn't be truthful to myself. Day or night, that doesn't make a matter. Win or lose, I'm a Cub fan 24 hours a day.
Harry's some character. I had a chance to go over to his home last week and talk to him there. He can remember baseball incidents that you can only read about in history books, remember them with a very clear mind at 91 years old. He's a very unique person, almost as unique as the ballpark itself. Harry will be turning on that switch in just a few minutes. Actually, it's a symbolic switch that he'll be turning on. An engineer will be underneath the bleachers doing the actual job down there, and then it'll take about 20 minutes or so for the lights to come on. WGN's Jack Brickhouse is the on-field master of ceremonies tonight. Jack is standing by near the Philadelphia Phillies on-deck circle. Jack is over there about to introduce Harry Grossman. You see Jack looking very cool. Jack not dressed up in a tuxedo like some of us are tonight. Steve Stone, Dwayne Statz, our assistant down here, Joe Corneo, and others. Wayne Messmer looking very sharp. He'll sing the national anthem tonight. Cubs are getting warmed up here and about to take infield practice. Again, the weather is very, very hot down here. In fact, it's just about as uncomfortable on the field as it has been for any day game all year long. Humidity levels very, very high, and the temperature is certainly up in the 90s at this point, but expected to cool down. The wind at this point shouldn't be a factor in the baseball game. Here's our shot from the blimp tonight, a shot that should be absolutely beautiful before the night is over. Get a chance to see some of the traffic patterns around Wrigley Field. Traffic pretty well snarled up at this point. But all in all, it's a beautiful night for baseball, even if it is a little hot and humid. And we expect to have a great time here in the pregame show and then when the game starts at about 7 o'clock tonight. In just a moment, we'll be going over to Jack Brickhouse to turn that light switch on with Harry Grossman. In the meantime, we might tell you a little bit about what these lights are all about. 540 spotlights. General Electric is the contractor for the light stands here at Wrigley. They would put out just about 810,000 watts of electric power tonight as they light up this baseball field for the first time. There's a good shot at one of those standards. The Cubs are taking the field right now for infield practice. We'll talk to some of them later on as the evening progresses. Also, Don Granesco is in our lineup. We'll take a look at what Wrigley Field has meant to Cub fans throughout history. A big night here, and of course Harry and Steve with a leadoff man, an expanded edition of that coming up at about 6:30 or so. And a beautiful shot from way up. the Goodyear blimp. Crowd is coming in fairly early tonight. The stands are filling up, especially down here low. And we'll expect a full house of somewhere in the neighborhood of 37,000 plus. There's a look outside. This is down Waveland Avenue, and you can see the people lined up out there. There may be a 5-figure number of crowd outside the ballpark tonight as well. People just want to get close to Wrigley Field to be a part of this historic moment. And now let's go to Jack Brickhouse and Harry Grossman for the lighting ceremony.
Welcome to Wrigley Field for tonight's game between the Philadelphia Phillies and your Chicago Cubs. I'm Jack Brickhouse, and I'll be your master of ceremonies for this historic first game at night ever to be played at Wrigley Field. Now at this time, we direct your attention to the on-deck circle next to the Philadelphia Phillies dugout as the Wrigley Field lights will be officially turned on. Now, to perform the honors, the Cubs are proud to have a true die-hard Cubs fan. At the age of 91, he perhaps is the oldest Cubs season ticket holder. In fact, he has been in attendance at just about every Cubs home game for the last 25 years. His first Cub game he saw in 1906 at the age of 8 when the Cubs and the White Sox played in the World Series. Ladies and gentlemen, here tonight, age 91, to officially turn on the lights at Wrigley Field is Cubs fan Harry Grossman. Harry, welcome. Harry, I know you have something you want to say.
Can I have your attention for just one moment? I'm very proud and privileged and very happy to be chosen the one who's going to turn on the lights. I'll be more happier if all the fans will join me like a Harry Carey, 1, 2, 3, and then say, "Let there be lights," and put your finger. All you fans deserve it, and you certainly earned it. Huh? Be ready, fans. 1, a 2, a 3. Let there be.
All right, Harry Grossman with an outstanding job. Jimmy Pierce throwing baseballs at me from the dugout here. Well, the lighting sequence has begun. Frankly, I'm a little bit melancholy about this, and I'm sure a lot of other people are. After all, with lights, Wrigley Field loses part of what makes it so unique. But then there's so much more tradition left for all of us to enjoy. When this park went up in 1914 at a cost of $250,000, it would have been hard to imagine the legendary status it would gain through the years. It was Wigman Park back then, named after the owner of the Chicago Whales of the Federal League. But the Cubs moved in for the 1916 season. The ballpark became Cubs Park in 1920, and finally Wrigley Field in 1926. The Cubs played 2 World Series here prior to 1930, but it was in that decade that Wrigley Field began to build its storybook reputation. A key player, the immortal Babe Ruth, who in the 32 series allegedly pointed to the bleachers and then delivered.
I'll never forget it. It was a tough series. Both clubs riding each other. Well, I was this one particular time when I went to bat, Charlie Root was pitching. And I looked down at center field and I pointed. I said, I'm going to hit the next pitch ball right past the flagpole. Well, the good Lord must have been with him.
True or not, that's entwined in the Wrigley folklore, as is the 100% legitimate Homer in the Gloaming by Gabby Hartman in 1938. Lights were almost a part of Wrigley Field history in the early 40s, but P.K. Wrigley donated the material to the war effort. Cub fans had to settle for another World Series instead in 1945. The Cubs lost to Detroit, and there hasn't been another series since. But there have been great moments. This ballpark has seen 6 no-hitters, the most dramatic, Don Cardwell's Cub debut in 1960.
Watch it. There's a drive on the line to left field. Come on, Moose. He did it. He did it. Moran made a fabulous catch. It's a no-hitter. A no-hitter. And what a catch that Moran made. Oh, brother, what a catch he made.
Winning seasons were scarce. The '69 group turned on Chicago for most of one summer. More about them later on. But Cub fans thrilled to Ernie Banks' 500th homer in 1970. Billy Williams set the National League's consecutive game streak that same year. Finally, in 1984, the Cubs landed, improbably, back in the winner's circle, champions of the Eastern Division. And Wrigley Field was the site of postseason play for the first time in 39 years. The fun ended in the playoffs, won by San Diego, which moved on to the World Series. And, of course, the most distinguishing feature of this ballpark, the ivy, which was strung up on the walls in 1938 by none other than the late Bill Vett. You'd have to wonder right now about how he'd feel about night baseball at Wrigley Field. We'll step aside for a moment now, and when we come back, the lights fight, how it started and how it finished, when Lights On continues in just a moment. Welcome back to Wrigley Field, where the lights are starting to take effect. The switch has been thrown for a little over 7 minutes now, but this lighting process has been going on for over 7 years. WGN News reporter Jim Williams is standing by outside the park at Waveland and Sheffield with that part of the story. Jimmy?
Thank you, Dan. You know, this historic moment follows a fight between one of the city's most powerful corporations and one of the city's most politically active. A emotional fight staged at City Hall, Springfield, and in the courts. The fight developed shortly after Tribune Company purchased the Cubs from the Wrigley family. Cub officials initially downplayed reports that the team was considering lights at Wrigley Field, but General Manager Dallas Green later said night baseball at Clark and Addison was an eventuality, that the Cubs would have to consider lights if the team were to be competitive.
Something we have to look at now, and maybe with a little bit more oomph than we've been doing before.
That angered the anti-lights forces, and they went to work, staging protests designed to cast the Cubs as villains willing to destroy the community.
They do not care if our streets and our alleys are blocked with cars, keeping ambulances from sick residents, or keeping fire engines from burning homes. They do not care if our children are kept awake at night by the crowds and the traffic.
The Illinois General Assembly responded in June of 1982 by passing anti-noise legislation aimed at banning night games at Wrigley Field. The team was dealt a further blow the following year when the Chicago City Council passed a zoning ordinance that effectively blocked night games. The writing was on the ivy-covered walls. No night baseball was to be played at Wrigley Field. It appeared the anti-lights forces had won. The Cubs didn't give up, though. They took their fight to court. But they lost there as well. The Illinois Supreme Court upheld both laws as constitutional. Anti-lights forces were ecstatic.
The community won, the Tribune lost. Enough said, the fight is over.
But they were wrong. In November of 1987, with the Cubs threatening to leave the city for the suburbs, the late Mayor Harold Washington proposed a plan to allow the Cubs to play 18 games a year under the lights.
I think all parties have had sufficient dialogue. It's gone on interminably. The process has been open. It's been exhaustive. It's been complete. It's been fair. The decision has been arrived at. Yeah.
3 months after Washington's death, acting Mayor Eugene Sawyer picked up the ball, and the plan was approved by the City Council, clearing the way for 7 regular season night games this year and 18 a season in subsequent years. Anti-lights forces are threatening to file suit against the Tribune. In the meantime, they say they'll be out in this community to make sure that order is maintained and that the city keeps its various promises in terms of police protection and making sure that illegally parked cars are towed. Dan, back to you.
All right, Jim, thank you very much. Now joining us is Don Granesco, Cubs Executive Vice President. Don, how do you feel so far? How are things going outside the ballpark?
Everything is going great up to this point, Dan. Harry Grossman just turned the lights on, and he's quite the showman. And it was an electricity that went through the crowd, and I know when I first saw those lights go on, there was a tingle that I got from it all. So it's been a fabulous evening. I haven't seen anything quite like this. I wasn't out here when the Cubs won the division in '84, but the attention we're getting has just been incredible.
You must feel a little bit like an expectant father tonight.
Well, yeah, to a certain extent. You never know if, in fact, these things are going to come to be. We worked on this situation for about 5 or 6 years, and I personally was working on it for about 3.5, and there were certainly the low periods and some high periods in there when we thought that, you know, we might not see this day, but we persevered, and I think we've reached a compromise that is good for everybody involved.
A lot of people don't know how these front office guys operate. I know that Don Granesco was out shagging flies when the lights were turned on. What was it, about a week ago or so, Don?
Yeah, about a week ago after the Cubs care event, some of the outfielders had complained that they couldn't pick up the ball quite well enough in the outfield. So we re-aimed a number of the lights in the outfield, added a few more fixtures, and then Jim Fry and I and some others from the front office staff went out and shagged fly balls. Had a great time. And I think there's been a significant improvement in the lights, and if I can catch a fly ball, just think what these athletes can do.
All right, we hope the rest of this night goes as well as that night did for you.
So do we, and I understand the weather's supposed to hold off, and of course we all know that it doesn't rain at Wrigley Field.
Okay, Don, have a good night.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, what lights really mean at this ballpark is that baseball will continue here where it's been played for 74 years. There have been some good teams, some bad teams, some not so good, not so bad teams go through here, but there's one group that's unforgettable to Cub fans, and that's a group that wouldn't have minded playing some games under these lights either.
Deep to right, back, high! It's all over! Willie Smith just homered! The Cubs win the game!
More intoxicating than a dozen cold beers in the bleachers, the '69 Cubs got under Chicago's skin by opening a huge lead in the Eastern Division. Banks, Williams, Holtzman, Santo, solid at every position and headed for the first ever National League playoffs. Unfortunately, you know the rest. They fell apart in late season. A critical series in New York, at night, of course, put the Mets over the top, and they won the Eastern Division by 8 games over the Cubs.
Oh, one more. God. Your ball field that. Can't get wash on that for a year.
If you can believe it, that was 19 years ago, and the class of '69 has been able to overcome that disaster. To a man, they'll tell you there's still nothing like walking into Wrigley Field.
Oh, anybody that says any different, they don't know what they're talking about. I'd love to come back up here. Last year was my first time back in 14 years, and just when I walked out here, I wanted to cry.
In fact, players who got together last week for Randy Hundley's fantasy camp said one of the few regrets they had was not being able to play here under the new lights. Might have kept them fresh at the finish in '69.
The factor to me is that, like today, it's 98 degrees or whatever, and when you play a 2-week homestand in this type heat, I just think it takes a whole lot more out of you than those guys that are playing at night.
When you play day games, regardless of whether you're tired or not, or you have enough rest, you have a certain time that you have to be there, and there's no way of getting extra rest if you need it. And I think from that standpoint, the lights are going to help an awful lot.
Well, we had more or less 8 regulars that were playing every day, day in and day out. Maybe the heat did get to us a little bit. I don't think as much, though, as another relief pitcher could have helped us.
An honest man. Glenn Beckert and a lot of those '69 players will be in the stands for this game here tonight. Well, the weather has begun to look a little bit foreboding. We'll update the forecast as we continue on Lights On in just a moment.
Your Chicagoland Nissan dealers are saluting night baseball at Wrigley Field. Come take a test drive at any participating dealer and get a commemorative T-shirt and an official Major League Baseball. But hurry, or you'll be left in the dark.
Well, if you don't have a ticket for tonight's game, you can consider yourself fortunate for a couple of different reasons. One, you're not going to get wet. It looks like it's going to rain. And two, you'll have the benefit of Channel 9's coverage tonight. 11 cameras will document what happens at Wrigley Field in this game. And one of those is down at Harry Carey's restaurant, where our Bob Jordan is standing by. Robert.
That's right, Dan. It's not going to rain in here, and everybody at Harry Carey's is having a ball. About 250 people have paid $19.88, all of which will go to Cubs Care, the charity. And they're here feasting on antipasta and, let's see, looks like lasagna, chicken Vesuvio. And this is the chow line here at Harry's. Let's walk over here and talk to a couple of people. Are we having fun yet?
So far, so good.
Are you disappointed that you weren't able to make it to the game?
Sometimes, but I think we'll have a nice time tonight.
Okay. That's kind of the way it's been here so far. The crowd is still a little bit subdued. They expect to get wound up once the game gets underway. And then at 7 o'clock, Harry's will be open to the public, and they expect to pack it to the rafters. I'm the only one here, by the way, Dan, wearing a tuxedo, and a few moments ago, a guy walked up to me and said, hey, buddy, could you get me a drink? So I'm in trouble. I might start serving drinks for Harry later this evening. That's the way it's going, and we hope to keep you updated on the situation here.
All right, Bob, I've heard that same line 30 times so far tonight. Anyway, the man who's going to tie it all together for us here tonight is the same guy who gets it done game in and game out for WGN and the Cubs. That will be our award-winning producer-director, Arnie Harris, and for him, this isn't just another game either.
Smith waving.
One. Double play. Get it, Joe. 3. All right. Give me pitcher, Donnie. Stay there, Bruce. 4. We'll squeeze 4. Stay with him, Bruce. Punch 4 to the net. Stay there, Brucey. Squeeze 4.
If Arnie Harris sounds slightly subdued in the TV truck, consider that he's seen just about everything in 22 years of calling the shots at Cub games for Channel 9. But he's never seen a night game at Wrigley Field.
I'm ready, Danny. I wish it was over. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun, but the phone hasn't stopped ringing. But I am. I'm looking forward to it. And I was out here the first night, Monday night, when they put the lights on, and I was impressed. I thought the lighting was great. The corners were a little dark, but they're even dark here in the daylight. It should be a great event.
Last time the Cubs and WGN married up for an event of this scope, the Cubs were clinching a division title in '84. From the director's chair, tonight is even bigger.
Where does this game fit in as far as you're concerned and what you've done at Wrigley Field for Channel 9?
Well, I think right to the top. You know, the '84 pennant clincher was pretty good. But rating-wise, this, I'm sure, will parallel that. And I think because it's 4 years later, with more people maybe watching, more sets available, more people watching on cable, I would say it'll probably be the most watched show that I've ever done, and I'm looking forward to that.
Big night for Arnie Harris tonight, and a big night for all of us at WGN, and we're so happy that you've been able to join us for it. The weather so far, it's still holding off. A little dark back to the west, but right now, it's not raining, and we hope it won't. We'll leave you right now with a little bit of music from Steve Goodman, a man who was a great Cub fan in his life, and I know he would have enjoyed being at this game tonight. So for now, stay tuned. I'm Dan Roan at Wrigley Field. We'll see you later.
Lights On was brought to you in part by your Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana Chrysler Plymouth dealer, and by Nissan Cars and Trucks, built for the most important race of all, the human race.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the drive. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back. Root for the home team. And if they don't win, what else is new? It's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out. At the old ball game, play it, Jethro.